Architecture drawings aren't all just plans and sections. I know we all tend to lean towards 3D modelling and rendering as faster and higher quality methods of design exploration, but drawing is actually a really vital skill. I'm going to walk you through exactly how I created an entire world within my final year architecture project simply through drawing. I'll show you how I came up with project objectives, crafted a narrative, used different references, and iterated on my drawings to curate a dystopian master plan. Okay, so I know that architecture and drawing pretty much go hand in hand, but I feel like I was really uncomfortable with drawing just because I hadn't really had much practice with it in my other years at architecture school, and using this as a primary medium for this project was actually really daunting, especially at a stage where everyone else was moving on to doing their plans and sections and traditional drawings. I almost felt like I was backtracking because I was trying to find my way and find my style through this drawing, because I just couldn't really do 3D modeling anymore and I couldn't really just spend my time doing research. So it was almost a natural next step, but I was really hesitant about it at first. Okay, so I'm going to set some context really quickly. My final year project at architecture school was a master plan of a paradise garden city based on the Mughal concept of charbags, which are paradise gardens, and it's formed using weaving techniques that are typically used in Persian carpets to create different symbols and patterns, and there is a lot of meaning and depth behind those concepts. So if you do want to learn more about the research side and the context of what my project is, you can watch my Archi-Diary series on this channel, where I documented pretty much every week of that project and showed you how I built it up. So the challenge I was facing was that there were just too many projects and avenues to explore that I couldn't really 3D model every single one. And so instead, I tried to kind of take a chunk of what would be this master plan and just flesh out the corner component by drawing and using references and almost collaging different bits and pieces that I had liked through things that I was researching or plans that I had seen, and essentially just creating just a corner to start with. So this is the first drawing of the series, and it's what I started off with, just experimenting with what the corner of this carpet could look like. So as you can see, there's a few different lines denoting different things. You've kind of got a thicker border on this side, a thinner one on this side, and these elements basically represent the hovercraft components, which are essentially pushing all the typical building services to that boundary, and then these hovercraft components will allow the carpet to move and glide and even fly. And it was just a test, obviously. These elements don't really mean anything as of yet, but I later went on to kind of 3D model them based on substation elements and based on actual hovercraft components. I then imagined this whole drawing as an electrical district, so I actually 3D modeled this particular element in SketchUp already as a substation, which was essentially just modified a bit. And I was trying to blur the lines between a 3D structure and a 2D representation, since a carpet is viewed from above, and although the knots are 3D, it's basically designed as a series of pixelated squares. So I'll talk about references later on in the video, as that was something that helped me with the drawing block I had. But I had different symbols and elements, so as you can see, I basically had different kinds of grids. So the pluses and dashes that you see all over are elements that I would later zoom into and create like maintenance and repair units. But considering this to be a scale of 1 to 2000, you can basically begin to understand that even a simple line such as this can actually be a really important representation. It could be a big wall. I have sort of like grid lines underneath as well. And these kind of like yellow strips represent the knots, represent like the base thread running through the carpet. So obviously there are elements or layers underneath the actual components or the city elements that kind of tie together the whole carpet. And then elements like these, the lines kind of going this way and that way, represent that there are more threads, that they're linking to something else. Another thing that I would say is that identifying your objectives for the drawing really need to be clear before, especially if it's part of a series. And obviously I didn't know this at the time, but I was hinting at the fact that this could kind of go forward and become a whole series, which it did. But you just want to have those objectives or an idea clear from the beginning. Another thing was line thicknesses and representation of certain symbols is also really important. So one of the objectives from my brief was to preserve and recycle water in a sustainable manner, so that each thread of this carpet would actually be a water or a gas pipe, and then that's woven in such a specific manner so that each thread of the carpet would actually be functioning, and every district or every drawing would have different purposes. So in order to do this, I had to basically figure out how the main elements in each district would then connect to these threads, and what other kinds of infrastructure I might need in the city. So this is basically your substation or electrical component, and then you've got really purposefully designed pipes or water pipes or gas pipes, whatever it is, electrical pipes that lead to certain nodes or lead to certain things in the areas. You've got these kind of branching out over here, and then elements like these that I repeat throughout other drawings. Again, relating back to kind of creating this set of components that you can use again and again. So as you can see, this pipe goes all the way down here, has a few breakers. This is another take on the hovercraft element. It then leads back into what would be your secondary border. So all of that kind of energy is also being relayed back into what makes this carpet fly and move. Now, part of this series of drawings is to create a world, and I found that having a strong narrative really helped in discovering or creating elements in each district. I actually then zoomed in at a larger scale to kind of figure out what they would be, and essentially they're repair and maintenance units. So you can see that each kind of plus box or plan or building, whatever you want to call it, has walls. It has different purposes for those walls, and then you've got this thread running through it, and essentially it's kind of a repair unit where you weave the thread through, and it either kind of tightens them or trims them off, or it repairs them and fixes them in whichever way it's needed, really. So this was a lot more of a experimental drawing, again using different references, figuring out what each of these lines mean, whether it's as the thread moves on, it becomes renewed, it becomes a lot more, I guess, sustainable and efficient. And then basically before I knew it, I was creating a whole different set of drawings. I was making new districts, I was figuring out what each of those districts could represent, even working on a way larger scale to understand how the districts connect with each other and why do they do that in that specific way. Again, looking back at Persian carpets and the sort of structure of those carpets, usually it's very symmetrical, but sometimes there are carpets which also have a narrative or a story running throughout as well. But I essentially tried making sure that I could explain each and every part of the drawing in relation to the bigger picture. And although I was planning a series of 12 drawings, I didn't want these to be different from each other or even be highly detailed, because it would cost me a lot of time, which I really didn't have. So I tried doing one drawing a week with a new focus each time, and continue to have those conversations with my tutors on what this might look like or how I was planning to develop the project after the drawings. And then in the new year, I think it became really unsustainable for me to do one drawing a week to that level of detail. So I pushed to do at least 3 a week, and it was basically the only thing that I was doing, or even have them going in parallel. So you'll begin to see that there are common elements within most of them, like the yellow pieces of trace, the base grid with the pluses and minuses. And it was really interesting because this essentially became my drawing method, and now I had a consistent flow of steps or layers that I would build each time. At the same time, I was trying to strengthen the narrative and envision what my final model or renders might look like too. And I essentially landed on the myth of King Solomon's carpet. So this helped me to understand in very technical terms how the larger carpet needed to be and what that looked like on a scaled map. The choice of materials also came from this, so there were a lot of gears turning in parallel while I was working on these drawings. Sometimes you'll see things like the red pens or the white outline, or a change in line thicknesses, whether it's going from pen to a different color or going to pencil. Yeah, there was like a reason for all of those. Again, like some of it was staying consistent, like with the borders. Some of it was also experimenting with newer components, or even like mixing and matching different things to understand how I can reconfigure this particular district. And so this kind of method or way of world building is obviously really complicated, which is why it was a really big push, even as a final year project. I think this is one of my second favorite, or like top three favorite drawings, because it's another corner and I find the corners really interesting. And this is part of the carpet where it's almost beginning to unravel, and like obviously the whole city isn't quite complete at any given point. Similar to any other cities in the world, everything's, there are new buildings coming, new regeneration and growth. And so this was kind of highlighting that point where there are loose threads, there are different areas where things are being renewed or restored, or you're finding ways of making things even better. So this was like a huge repair and maintenance unit, from going from this scale to a bigger one, where it's actually like the hub of how these threads are then, I guess, created or designed or redesigned in a way, and then kind of like moved along the carpet. So you might be wondering, well, where do you even start with a non-traditional drawing like this, where there's a lot of things going on, there's a lot of symbols, and how do you even read a drawing like this? And I always start with references and looking at things that I find intriguing, because this is by no means a way to like copy, but taking cues and frameworks from other designers. And one such person whose drawings I really admire is Perry Culper. He has a very distinct style and way of representing his research. His practice, as he describes, relying on an understanding of design as a kind of relational thinking, framing objects, events, or conceptual frameworks as structured relationships within the world. So part of the exercise in developing my own style in such a way was to examine Culper's drawings and identify commonalities or methods of representation that were similar across his work. I think that the key lesson I learned here was that there's no specific formula to creating your own style, but in fact it comes through after the fact, after you've practiced for weeks and created a selection of work where you can start to see those distinct qualities. Another aspect of these drawings is the playfulness between dimensionality. Since the elements in my project switch from 2D to 3D and then back to 2D, there's also layers in each drawing, and the layers start off with a base of trace that represent the groups of threads woven as like a foundational layer, which I explained before, and then the base grid, which changes according to each district and how certain central elements are placed, but they all do connect up with each other. And then the components themselves, which again vary in each drawing and are typically based on 3D models that I've created previously. So this element is a 3D model, and then also like the bigger repair and maintenance unit is a 3D model. This element I've kind of traced off the screen, literally from a 3D model again. So the last piece of the puzzle is obviously doing the work and creating the drawings. And it requires a lot of iteration, and I think I was working on these drawings for at least a month, and after a while it became easier because I had crafted a series, a method, a certain steps and components, and a system to follow, and I was also reusing bits and pieces from previous drawings to kind of keep things cohesive. So the key with iteration, I think, is to have a high level of patience, because I found it really easy to just stop and consider like moving on to the next thing, or just giving up, or leaving the drawing unfinished. But there's a real sense of like satisfaction when you finish a drawing, which is crazy. On the other hand, I'm sure you've also had a piece of work that never felt quite finished, and maybe another hour or two could completely transform that drawing. Part of developing a project, especially in an academic environment, often means that you're on a timer of sorts, and there's deadlines and other projects to focus your attention on. But I think being strict with your time is almost half the game. So if I hadn't made that decision to kind of create drawings faster, I wouldn't have finished those and moved on to actually building the thing and making that model. So yeah, those are the ways in which I made my own style of architectural drawing for my final year project. And next week I'll walk you through the final model itself. So be sure to check that out and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for watching.